Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Miss Mary Designs. Today I am going to tell you the story behind my business, Miss Mary Designs. So this is how did my business come about, and it is going back in time, and it is just telling you how the business developed, where it came from. So if this isn't what you want to see, click away now, but otherwise it's my journey. I think it's an interesting journey, and I hope you do too. So let's get into it. So I'm going to go right back and let you know where my love of crafting and sewing came from. Now, I grew up with a mother who couldn't sew, but she was a very good knitter, and she could knit the most intricate patterns. And it always fascinated me how she used to say, oh, I haven't had much education, I'm not very smart, yet she could pump out these fantastic knitted garments. And I used to watch, and I did learn to knit. My mum didn't teach me. We had to learn to knit when we were at school. I've got dogs coming around me, so you will see I'm minding my... Come here. Come here. Isn't she gorgeous? So this is Indy. This is my son's dog. I'm minding her while he's overseas. And she is a Bordoodle. So she's crossed Poodle and Border Collie. There we go. And I've got my Zeus in the background. You can see him there. So he's got a friend for a few weeks. Anyway, back to my story. So I was taught to knit when we were at school. So when I was in year 5, I was about 10 years old, and we used to have to do knitting or sewing, and we used to have one lesson a week, and then we'd have to go off and finish our project or, work on it. And we learnt to hand sew. So I did sew something, but by hand. We didn't have machines or anything like that. So I didn't really learn sewing, but I did learn knitting. I learned just plain knitting and purl, and that was it. And I used to drop stitches and get frustrated, and I never was really a knitter. Fast forward, I'm in my 20s, and my sister is a sewer. And she said to me, oh, you should sew. And I went, what for? Why do I need to sew? I was married. I was working full time. I was into gardening. I love gardening. And, that was what my weekends were: cleaning the house, doing the chores, and working in the garden. And that was it. So she said to me, one of my friends is selling up. She's going to be traveling around Australia for a few years, and she's selling an almost new machine for $50, which was very cheap. It would be cheap now, but it was still cheap back then. So we're talking 40 something years ago. And she said, you should get it because, I know her, she won't sell you a dud. So I got the machine, and then she said to me, you should do some lessons. And I went, where do I do lessons? And at the time where I lived, only 5 minutes from home, there was a shopping centre, and in that shopping centre they had a fabric shop, and they used to run lessons, but it was only stretch knits. So first time I went along to my first lesson, she showed us how to make a cowl neck. Now that's like a long neck that it looks like you've got a scarf attached to your garment, but it was a top with a cowl neck, a nice warm winter top, and she made it in like such quick time. I couldn't believe it. And so I bought the fabric, got the pattern, went home, had it all ready. A couple of hours later, I rang my sister and said, I can't sew with this machine. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Turns out I was threading it wrong. I just didn't. That was how basic my knowledge of sewing was. And unfortunately, the sewing machine didn't come with a book for me to follow. And we didn't have the internet back then. I'm talking about like 82, 83. So no internet. I would have been right. If there was an internet, I would have just YouTubed it and sorted out the problem. But anyway, I didn't even know that it was a threading problem. So yeah, she sorted that out. And once I got going, being a new sewer, of course I did it. My seams were like a bit wonky, and Yeah, I was very slow at doing it, but in under an hour, I had made myself a garment that looked good, fitted well, and that I could actually wear. I was blown away that I could actually do that. And that was it. I was hooked. And so I kept going to lessons. Did 6 lessons in all. Learnt to make dresses, learnt to make skirts, shorts, and then we had lessons where you learned how to adapt the patterns. So you could see what was fashionable at the time and what you needed to do to the pattern to make it into that fashion garment. So starting off with a basic t-shirt pattern, how you could change it, or a basic skirt and how you could change it and flare it and put pockets in it and do all sorts of things. So, and they used to have fashion parades, this fabric shop that ran these lessons, and I always went along to the fashion parades, and they used to make the most wonderful fashionable garments that you'd see on any catwalk. They were fantastic. And I learned how to do that, and then I was being asked, oh, can you make this for me, or can you do that? It went on, and then I started making garments for family, for Christmas, birthdays, that sort of stuff. And the more I sewed, the more I learned. And then I went, I don't just need to do this with stretch fabrics, I'll see what I can do with woven fabrics. And yes, it was a lot of experimenting. I learned how to do darts. I learned how to put zippers in. I learned lots of things. But, you know, when I was learning to put a zipper in, I thought, I'm not going to do this on a garment. So I made some cushion covers with zippers. And, you know, I did it on garments that were easy, you know, and then tackling more complicated things. So that's how I learned sewing, and I just loved it. I just loved that you could make something from a piece of fabric, and then you have leftover fabric and you're looking at, what can I do with this? It's only a little bit of fabric, but I'm sure I can make something. So I started making little door stops and all sorts of little knicky-knack things. With my crochet, I learnt to do that when I was 11. I was in high school, and one of the girls brought crochet along, and in lunchtime she was doing it, and I asked, what are you doing? And she showed me, and she said, get a crochet hook and a ball of wool and bring it and I'll show you. And over a few weeks, she taught me just a basic stitches. But then I was able to, with 3 basic stitches, look at things that people had crocheted, and I'd go, yeah, I can work out how that's done. That's a combination of those few basic stitches that I've got. And I was making like scarves and blankets, yeah, just making very small things, hot water bottle covers, those sort of things. And it just grew from there. The more I did, the more I realized it's all about maths. It's about increasing, decreasing, counting. And so I mastered the crochet, and I just loved it. Now, the knitting, that came on later. Now, my marriage to my first husband ended, and I remarried. And I remarried a man who was in a wheelchair. Now, that's really not significant, but it is part of the story, and you'll see down the track why it becomes significant. So we were married in 2009, and my eldest daughter had left home, so there was just my younger two. And it was just before my youngest was entering high school. So he was 12 or 11, 12, and my daughter was about 14, 15. So we married, sold the house, moved into a new house which was suitable for a wheelchair, and I was his carer. So I worked 3 days a week, and the rest of the time I would look after him. And so that meant that I was spending a lot of time at home. Well, I mean, we did go out, and I'll put some pictures up. We used to get out a lot. We used to go into the city once a month, and we'd play the tourist, and we'd go to all the landmarks and to the art gallery in the city. We'd go to the botanical gardens. We'd spend a day, and about once a month we'd go to carols by candlelight at the Domain. So we did get out, but it wasn't on a regular basis. We might go out once a week, or once a fortnight, depending on the weather, because with the wheelchair we couldn't go out if it was raining. So it meant that I had a lot of downtime. I mean, he didn't need me on hand all the time. He needed me here in case he needed anything. And I had a lot of time on those days when I wasn't working, where I needed to stay at home a lot of the time. And I needed to fill my days. So, I mean, there's only so much gardening you can do. And when it's hot, you don't want to be outside in the sun for long periods. So I started sewing, I started crocheting, and I started knitting. And I started stockpiling so many things. I learned how to crochet beanies, and I used to do beanie and scarf sets, and I used to stockpile them, and then when winter would come, we'd go into the city and we'd take bags, like I'd take 100 at a time, sets, and we'd pile them all on the back, we'd hook them all around the wheelchair, and we'd go on the train into the city, and we'd take them to a homeless setup that was in the city for all the homeless folks. Yeah, so that was what we used to do. And then in 2018, I came home from work one day and found my husband passed away. It was the most devastating thing that's ever happened in my life. My husband was the sweetest, most gentlest person, kind and caring, and he was my life. And to lose him, but we had such a close bond because I was his carer, because we were together 24/7 when I wasn't working. My working for 3 days a week was my break from it all, was my escape, was mixing with other people, doing something, using my brain. And when I came home and found him passed away, I couldn't believe it. And he'd passed away about an hour and a half before I came home. Now, we did have an autopsy to find out, and they just put it down to, listed on his death certificate is complications of Becker muscular dystrophy. Now, I believe his oxygen level was low and he's gone off to sleep. He's fallen forward, didn't have very good diaphragm muscles, and he just passed away in his sleep because he wasn't getting enough oxygen. He was actually at his computer and he was working on a grant. He used to be in the country music club, and they used to get a grant so that they could run a big talent quest, which ran over a few days, and it was very big and it attracted a lot of entrants from interstate. So he used to work on that for them, put in the submission, which was a lot of work, and he passed away doing what he loved. Yeah. So that left the biggest hole in my life, and I did not cope with grief at all. Yes, I was still working, but barely. I don't know how I managed to actually function at work. I would often be found in the car park because I'd have to leave the office, and I'd be in the car park and I'd just be bawling my eyes out. I found it very, very difficult. And 18 months after that, we all know what happened in 2020. So working from home was horrendous for me because I was stuck in the place that held all the memories of me and my husband, and there was no escape because we were locked down. And the grief just escalated. I did end up resigning from work January 2021. And I thought, yep, I'll just have a nice holiday. But what did I do? I did sewing and I did crochet and I did knitting. My stockpile grew, so I had so much stuff. And I kept saying to my kids, I'm going to set up a business and I'm going to sell all this stuff, because I used to run my own business previously. And yeah, for 20 years I had a business which was computerized embroidery and screen printing. So I just couldn't get my head around it. I just didn't have confidence. I just couldn't tackle social media. Yeah, I just felt like I was out of my depth and I didn't have anyone to help me. So still kept making things. And then things changed last year. I found, and the other thing was that I didn't mention was that I had really, really bad rheumatoid arthritis and it was getting worse. So I used to say, well, I can't go back into business because I'm unreliable. Some weeks I wouldn't be able to do anything. Other weeks I felt fine. But some days I couldn't get out of bed. I was bedridden a lot of the time. And I said, I can't run a business if I'm like this. But last October, I found a way of eating which eliminated my rheumatoid arthritis 90%. I still do suffer from it, but nowhere near what I was. And with that, I lost a lot of weight. My brain fog went because I did have very bad brain fog. I could get my thoughts together. I became confident. I got on YouTube and started learning about social media. I'm still not very good, but I do what I can. And I went, that's it, bite the bullet, you're starting a business. Because look at all this stuff you've got. So I set about setting up this room as my sewing room. Now this room is where my husband passed away. It had all his music gear in it. It had all his disability equipment. So I had things like hoists, shower chairs, wheelchairs, keyboards, desks, all his stuff from way back. He had records, CDs, DVDs, but he was a collector, an avid collector of all those things. There was so much stuff that I had to sort through. Now, it wasn't that I hadn't tried to sort through that earlier. I had come in here and it had been 6 years since he'd passed away. Well, it had actually been, it was really about 6 years, close to 6 years. I had come in here so many times and just touching the stuff, I would start crying and have to walk out and leave the room, and then I couldn't come back for another week. But I got someone to come and help me so that they were here for a couple of hours, and it was like, well, they're being paid. I have to do this no matter how difficult it is. And sure, they knew. And I'd say, I have to take a break. And I would leave, we'd go have something to eat for lunch and come back. But between times, I would be set tasks like, okay, before you come back, if we can move these things out of the room, and then I'll tackle them, and then we'll come and do more next week. So I was working on it and I got everything sorted. So that did take a while. It took a couple of months, and that's when I was ready to set this up. So all the fabric you see behind me, I used to have it because there was a fantastic shop that used to sell fabric for $2 a metre. It didn't matter what it was. And, back then fabric was like $10 a metre. So I used to go and I used to bulk buy. I used to buy about 4 or 5 metres if I found a fabric I liked. And I never went there without finding a fabric I didn't like. So I had all these plastic storage totes, and we've got a lot of room in this house. So I just had them all stored in one room that wasn't being used, and there was a lot. And then I had stuff from my business. So I had a lot of backing, needles, threads, all sorts of things that were stored there as well. So being able to set the room up has just been fantastic for me because I've got all my fabrics available at my fingertip. I've got, don't know if you can, you won't be able to see over there. I've got all my yarns. Now, when my husband passed away, there was a shop that was closing down in the main street, and it was one of those variety stores, but they did sell wool or yarn and cotton yarn. And that, first of all, it was 10% off, then 20%, then 30%. Well, when I got to 50%, I went, these are bargains. So I started going in and I would buy the whole packet. So that's 10 balls, and they were 100-gram balls of acrylic yarn. So I'd buy 10, I'd buy a packet, but I'd walk out with 4 or 5 packets at a time. Well, they increased it it got to 70% off. And so I have a stash of packets of wool or yarn. That's not wool, it's acrylic yarn. And I'm still working my way through it. So I think I've got enough for the next couple of years. But again, it's all bargain stuff. Being a sewer, I used to buy always, if I was buying fabric to make a garment, I would make sure I had the matching thread. So you can see all the fabric behind me. I've got matching thread for most of it, so I've got lots and lots of threads, and now I've got them on a pegboard, easily accessible. And I brought my office into this room as well, so my computer's set up here. And I had all the storage cupboards and things left over from clearing out my husband's stuff. And so I've used that to store a lot of things in. And luckily I had two friends who were selling industrial sewing machines, bargain price. One was $100 and one was $400. So I've picked up two good industrial sewing machines. One is just a normal straight sewing industrial machine. The other is an upholstery machine for making bags. So that is the story of how I set up my business. Now, why did I decide to go to the markets? I would not have a shop again because it ties you to 6 days a week, sometimes 7. The rents are astronomical. The internet has made things accessible online, and people do not have shop fronts a lot of the time. But I need contact with people. I love the feedback. I love mixing and mingling with people, and so I do the markets. The markets are hard work. I do need to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to the markets. I pack my car the night before and then I just drive to the markets, but then I need to be setting up. So I have to set up a gazebo. I have to lug tables, 6-foot tables. I have 3 tables. Then I have all my other stuff for displaying my stock. I have to take all my stock, which is in totes. Now I take probably large totes, I take 6, small totes, I take about 8. And then I have things which are in bags as well, so I can stuff them in little holes in my car is fully packed. I'm taking on more markets, seeing that we're coming up to Christmas, but that means that I have to work harder when I'm not doing the markets because I have to have a stockpile of stock because I've got less time doing more markets. I have less time for making stock. But I love that people love the bucket hats that I've got on now, and in winter they were loving the scarves and the beanies. I started doing these headbands. They're quite popular, especially that I do rock and roll. So a lot of these will sell more online for the rock and roll crowd. I do these. This isn't a wire one, but I do ones with wire. I do other sorts of headbands as well with elastic in them or just a stretchy one. I do what they call a chemo cap or a lady's turban. So people who have lost their hair due to chemotherapy and they need something to cover it, I do that. What else do I do? I make bags. I make bucket hats. I do scarves and beanies, as I've said. I do crocheted market bags. They are very popular. They're done with cotton, and I do have a lot of cotton that I picked up on special. So that is how my business, the story, well, it's how my business started. It is the story of Miss Mary Designs. Now, why did I call it Miss Mary Designs? I called it Miss Mary Designs because I couldn't register a business name using my name, Diane, or Di. And I tried everything. Diane's Designs, Di's Designs, Diana's Designs. It was either taken or it was too similar to other business names. So I went, right, I'll use Mary. But I wanted it to roll off the tongue. Mary Designs? No. Miss Mary Designs? Sounded a bit better. And it was available. I told my friend about it probably about 2 months before I launched the business. And she said to me her name was Mary. And she said, every time you say the name Miss Mary, you'll think of me. Now, I didn't know it at the time. She kept it very quiet. She had cancer and she passed away just as I started my business. And I tell you what, every time I say the name, I think of her. I think of you, Mary. She was a lovely, lovely lady and very dearly missed by thousands of people because she was very well known in the rock and roll circuit. So anyone who's from rock and roll and you know Mary, you will know who I'm talking about. What a lovely, lovely lady. Anyway, so that ends the story of how Miss Mary Designs came about, how I learnt my craft, sewing, knitting and crochet. The knitting I didn't really go into. I went into the city. I used to go on the anniversary of my husband's death because I could not stay home on the anniversary of his passing. and I would go into the city and I would do what we used to do, but I would stay there for a couple of days. Well, one time I went there and I thought, you know what, I'm going to challenge myself. And I got a pattern for an Aran jumper. Now, if you haven't seen what an Aran jumper is, I will put some pictures up. It is very complicated. It comes from I think it's the Isle of Arran, or the county. I think it's an island off Ireland, I think it is. And I didn't know how complicated they were, but I just said, you know what? This is just a matter of following the pattern, doing what it tells me. And if I don't know what it is, I can always YouTube it and see what they're talking about. So I have made myself an Aran jumper, and I have tackled a few other complicated patterns. My next challenge will be to do Fair Isle. Now, I'll put some pictures of Fair Isle up as well. And I just don't have time at the moment. I'm too busy producing stuff. So that's on the back burner. But I've got lots of projects. As anyone who is a crafter, we always have lots of projects that we want to do, and a lot of projects that are all on the go. So hope you've enjoyed the video. And if you have any questions, please ask me. And if you've liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It helps the channel. I'm still hoping to get to 1,000 subscribers. I'd love to be able to monetize my channel. Anyway, see you next week, hopefully. And have a great week, everyone. Bye for now.